The town called her a liar. The rancher said nothing, until the truth cost him everything. Calico Ridge, late afternoon, autumn of 1888. The wind had that crisp bite that hinted at winter, but the dust in the marketplace hung thick and still. What was normally the busiest day of the week, Market Day, had become something darker. The center of town was packed with farmers, traders, wives with baskets, and old men who thought they had seen every wrong a human could commit, and now they gathered for a different spectacle. In the center of the square stood Elsie Ray Holloway, her wrists tied tightly behind her back, ankles secured in iron shackles. Her dark hair was tangled and soiled, her once clean dress faded and stained from travel. In the sharp light of the afternoon, a crude sign hung from her neck, words scrawled in rough ink. Con woman, liar, baby thief. The circle of townsfolk around her was dense. Some pointed and sneered, others folded their arms and watched in grim silence. A few older women murmured prayers under their breath, though their eyes held judgment more than mercy. A stout woman in a faded bonnet flicked the rind of an apple at Elsie's feet and snarled, "You'd steal a newborn from its own kin? What sort of creature are you?" The din of voices rose, rumors of a vanished family, the Montroses, wealthy landowners who had simply disappeared weeks before, had spread like wildfire through Calico Ridge. Then, locals had stumbled upon a newborn child in a lonely shack by the creek, with Elsie found inside, tending to her as though she were the child's own mother. It seemed a benevolent act at first, but when Elsie failed to produce any witness or document beyond her own word, suspicion wrapped itself around her like iron bands. She claimed the Montroses had entrusted their child to her. She said they gave her a letter, a document granting temporary guardianship. No one in that square had seen that letter. And in a place where land, legacy, and lineage counted for everything, the simplest explanation became the most damning. She had fabricated the story to seize the child and claim the Montrose estate. Elsie stood there without outcry or protest. She did not beg, she did not wail, she did not shout that she was innocent. She simply looked ahead, her face pale but composed. That silence made some believe she was guilty. An innocent woman would fight, they said. An innocent woman would scream. At the edge of the crowd stood Jonas Vance, 32 years old, lean from years on the Blackstone Ranch, boots still streaked with morning mud. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, not speaking, not condemning. His expression was unreadable in the harsh light. He was the only man there who had seen a different side of Elsie, late one stormy night 6 weeks earlier, when she came to his door, soaked and desperate, holding a crumpled piece of paper and begging him to read it. He remembered the letter clearly, now folded and hidden in his private chest back at the ranch. He was the only witness who could corroborate her story, but to produce it would mean revealing more than her innocence. The letter spoke of fear and haste. The Montroses had fled the law after some shady land deals fell apart. In it was a plea, an explicit request that Elsie care for their infant daughter until the turmoil passed. And buried in the margin was a name that made Jonas's stomach drop, his own. The letter hinted that he was the illegitimate son of Mr. Montrose, a truth he had never shared with anyone. If Jonas brought the letter forward, if he confirmed it was real, he would be revealing his own origin, unraveling every bit of respectability he had painstakingly earned in Calico Ridge. He had worked the Blackstone Ranch from dawn to dusk, built a reputation on honest labor, refused to lean on family ties even if they existed. So he stood in the back and watched. He did not shout, he did not intervene. And the townspeople jeered and judged her. Elsie's silence did not make her appear innocent. It made her appear guiltier still. And Jonas's silence bore witness not to doubt, but to fear. In that moment, while the sun beat down and dust swirled at their feet, a woman stood condemned, not because of evidence, but because no one would speak the truth. The rain that night was soft but steady, soaking the dirt road that led from the chapel to the edge of Blackstone Ranch. The horses had long been stabled, the lanterns dimmed. Jonas Vance had just finished his supper when the knock came. He opened the door to find a figure barely standing. Elsie Ray Holloway, drenched to the skin, clutched something close to her chest. Her dark hair stuck to her face, and her boots sloshed when she stepped into the light. Without waiting for invitation, she looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "They told me to trust you," she whispered. "They wrote it in the letter, and they left the baby with me." She handed him the bundle she carried. It was a child, no older than a few weeks, silent, warm, asleep. Jonas blinked, but before he could say a word, she reached into her coat and brought out a folded letter, soggy with rain. The paper trembled in her hand. She passed it to him with quiet urgency. He took it and stepped inside. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Jonas crouched near it, trying to warm and dry the letter without tearing it. The ink had run in places, but the signature at the bottom remained legible, Eleanor Montrose. He read the letter in silence. Eleanor's words were hurried but clear. She wrote that her family had been forced to flee Calico Ridge to escape the impending investigation into their land deals. She expressed her gratitude to Elsie, entrusting her with the care of their newborn daughter. And, in the final lines, Eleanor revealed something Jonas had never spoken aloud, that he was the illegitimate son of Everett Montrose, a truth buried deep beneath the town's polite fictions. Jonas's jaw tightened. His fingers curled around the letter. He looked up at Elsie, who stood there soaked and waiting. Her face was calm, but her eyes begged him to believe her, to do something. But Jonas didn't move. He said nothing. He asked her to wait outside for a moment and returned to the room alone. From a drawer, he pulled a second letter, the duplicate Elsie had brought as a precaution, and stared at it. Then, wordlessly, he struck a match and burned it. The flames licked at the edges, curling the paper into blackened scraps before it disappeared into ash. He kept the original, tucking it away in a wooden box under lock and key, not for safekeeping, not for justice, but for fear. "I can't let this come out," he whispered to himself. "If the town finds out I'm a Montrose bastard, they'll take everything, my land, my name." He told himself he was preserving order, that if the Montroses returned, the truth would sort itself out, that it wasn't his responsibility to fix what someone else had broken. But each day after, he found himself riding past the old chapel where the baby had been taken. And each night, he heard more talk. They said Elsie had gone mad, made up stories, invented a letter no one had ever seen. They said she'd been stripped of her shoes and locked without food. They said she hadn't shed a single tear. Jonas said nothing, but he remembered the rain, the trust in her voice, the way she looked at him like he was the last honest man left. And now, in the silence of his barn, or in the creak of saddle leather on an early ride, he saw her face. He had taken her trust and buried it beneath his fear. She had given him the truth, and he had chosen not to speak. Now, they called her a liar, and she stood alone. And Jonas Vance, the only man who knew she wasn't, felt the weight of his silence grow heavier with every passing hour. The courthouse had never been so full. Chairs scraped against wooden floors, hats were removed, whispers flew like sparks from a brush fire. The town council had called an emergency hearing after news spread that Jonas Vance, owner of Blackstone Ranch, intended to speak on behalf of Elsie Ray Holloway. Jonas stood at the center of the room, flanked by two deputies who had not yet decided whether to guard him or arrest him. He wore no hat. His shirt was clean but crumpled, as if he had dressed quickly, without thought. In his hand was a folded letter, now dried, pressed between waxed linen to preserve the fragile ink. He held it with both hands, like scripture. "I have something to read," he said, his voice even. A letter written by Eleanor Montrose 3 weeks before she and her husband fled this town. A hush fell. Jonas unfolded the paper and read aloud, line by line. The words rang out, clear and slow. A mother's voice entrusting her infant daughter to the care of Miss Elsie Holloway, praising her character, asking the town to protect her if the family should not return. The letter spoke of a land scheme gone wrong, a scandal they feared would ruin innocent lives, and their desperate plan to disappear. And then, at the very end, Eleanor wrote plainly, "Jonas Vance is to be trusted. He has more right to the Montrose name than most who carry it." A silence deeper than shock gripped the room. No one moved. Then the murmurs began. "He's claiming to be a Montrose?" someone muttered. "He's lying. He wants the land." A man stood up. Mr. Baylor, a trader known for his loud opinions and louder debts. "This is convenient, don't you think?" he barked. A bastard child comes forward with a miracle letter, just in time to save the woman he fancies. He's not proving her innocence. He's trying to steal a fortune. Jonas did not flinch. A woman near the back, Mrs. Stoddard, who ran the grocer, pointed a gloved finger toward Elsie. She fooled him. He's under her spell. Maybe she's carrying his child next. That drew laughter. Ugly. Sharp. Jonas raised his voice. "I'm not here to claim land. I'm here because I let a lie grow bigger than my fear." But no one listened. The mayor leaned forward. "Mr. Vance, without corroborating evidence, without the Montroses themselves, this letter could have been written by anyone. We cannot, we will not, let hearsay overturn the safety of this town." Elsie, seated in shackles near the rear door, did not cry. Her face remained expressionless, but her eyes, usually fierce and unwavering, dimmed. She looked at Jonas for a long time, then said quietly, "I told you. The truth can't save anyone, if they don't want it." Jonas opened his mouth, but couldn't find the words. He had braved humiliation, torn open a secret buried for decades, and placed it all in the hands of people who had already decided what to believe. And they didn't believe him. They believed she had seduced him. They believed the baby was a ploy. They believed that truth must look shiny and clean to be real. And Elsie was too quiet, too ragged, too stubborn. The council moved to postpone judgment. They would investigate further. They would deliberate. But in that room, filled with sweat and suspicion, the verdict was already written in the sneers and sidelong glances. Jonas stepped down from the stand. No one clapped. No one nodded. Even the deputies looked away. He passed by Elsie, and for the first time, she didn't look up. And in that stillness, Jonas Vance realized it was not the truth they had rejected. It was her. The wind that swept through Calico Ridge that night was colder than usual for early autumn, as if the town itself knew something irreversible was about to happen. The streets were quiet, windows shuttered, lamps dimmed. The silence only made the ticking inside Jonas Vance's head louder. Tomorrow morning, they would take Elsie away. Jonas hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. His boots were still muddy from the fields, but his mind was elsewhere, stuck on the sound of her voice. That night she brought him the child, the letter, the trust. And he had failed her. Now, the only thing he had left was action. Under the cover of night, Jonas saddled his horse without lighting the stable lantern. Dressed in black, a worn bandana around his neck, he took only what he needed: a coiled rope, a knife used for trimming leather, and the guilt he'd carried like a stone in his gut for weeks. He rode without a sound, skirting the edge of town, avoiding the main road. The jail stood at the southern end, a squat, blocky structure of rough stone and iron bars, with 2 deputies posted out front and a lantern swaying by the entrance. He waited in the shadow of the livery stable across the street, timing their movements. Then he moved. Approaching from the side, Jonas found the iron-barred window leading into the lower holding cell. He crouched beneath it, pulled the leather knife from his belt, and started working at the lock on the supply hatch. A small maintenance opening meant for food or water. Now his only chance in. The metal groaned softly under pressure. His heart pounded in his ears. Click. The lock gave way, just enough for him to slip his hand inside and unlatch the side gate. But just as he moved to open it fully, a voice rang out. "Hey, who's there?" Jonas didn't hesitate. He turned and met the first guard head-on, grabbing the man by the shoulder and driving him backward into the wall. A second guard came in swinging. Jonas ducked, using his momentum to throw the man over his back. He fought like a rancher fights, untrained, brutal, pure instinct. Years of breaking wild horses, hauling sacks of grain, and wrangling cattle had built him into a man who could endure. But 3 against 1 was never fair. A club caught him in the ribs. Another blow slammed into his jaw. He went down hard, breath torn from his lungs, vision swimming. Inside the jail, Elsie had heard the scuffle. Her voice echoed through the bars, filled with fear. "Jonas?" The guards dragged her out roughly. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, her hands bound. They threw her to the ground beside him as if she were a common thief. "Found your hero," one of the deputies sneered. Jonas tried to rise, but another boot pushed him down. Blood trickled from his temple. They shackled them both and hauled them into the darkest cell below the main jail, a place meant for vagrants and drunks. The air was damp, the walls dripped. The iron bars rusted. Inside, in the dim light, Elsie sat with her back to the wall, eyes wide with disbelief, and something else, sorrow. Jonas, breath still ragged, managed to sit upright. "I tried," he rasped. "I know," she said softly. He turned to her, blood drying on his face. "I thought, if I told the truth, they'd believe it. I thought I could fix it." Her voice didn't shake. "The truth doesn't matter here, Jonas. Not unless the right person says it, and they don't think that's you." There was silence then. Just the sound of water dripping and their breathing sinking in the dark. After a while, she leaned toward him. Gently, with the sleeve of her dress, she wiped the blood from his cheek. "You came anyway," she whispered. Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. In that cell, with bruises blooming and dignity gone, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding, and something close to beginning again. The cell was cold, built from uneven stone blocks that soaked up the chill of the earth beneath. A single oil lamp flickered in the iron sconce, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The only furniture was a threadbare blanket in the corner, and the silence between them. Jonas Vance sat against the far wall, breathing shallowly. One hand pressed against the bruise, spreading along his ribs. Dried blood crusted the edge of his brow, where the skin had split during the fight. He wasn't used to losing, not battles, not control, and certainly not himself. He stared ahead, then finally spoke, voice raw. "I was afraid, not of losing the land, not even of the town turning against me. I was afraid that once they knew the truth, they'd see me for what I really am. Nothing." Elsie sat across from him, knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around them. Her dress was torn, her face pale in the low light, but her voice was steady. "I know that fear," she said. "But do you want to know what hurt the most? It wasn't being accused or humiliated or locked in here. She looked straight at him, eyes unwavering. It was being abandoned by the one person I believed would stand up. Jonas closed his eyes. Shame burned deeper than the bruises. "I read that letter a dozen times," he murmured. "I nearly burned it the night you gave it to me. Then I kept it. I kept it because I thought maybe it would remind me not to be a coward. But all it did was remind me I already was." The silence returned, heavy, until Elsie's voice broke it, quiet but unwavering. "I forgive you, Jonas." He looked up sharply, surprised. "But," she added, "I don't forgive the man who stayed silent while truth begged for air." Jonas didn't answer. What could he say? She was right. Elsie shifted, then reached into the torn pocket of her dress and pulled out something small, a frayed ribbon, pale blue, still faintly scented of lavender. Without a word, she crawled closer and gently lifted the hair from his forehead. With slow, careful hands, she tied the ribbon around the cut, her fingers brushing his skin like a whisper. Jonas sat frozen, not from pain, but from something deeper, the weight of being tended to with kindness he didn't deserve. He reached for her hand when she was done, not grabbing, just resting his fingers against hers. A light touch, a silent promise. Elsie didn't pull away. There were no declarations, no confessions, no sweeping words or poetic vows. Just two people sitting in a cell, bound not by iron, but by the raw truth between them. Jonas finally spoke again, barely above a whisper. "I won't leave you again." And though she didn't reply, the way she leaned her head against the stone wall beside his, just close enough to feel his warmth, was all the answer he needed. Because in that moment, in the dark, in the dirt, with nothing left, they were finally equal. Not rescuer and rescued. Not liar and witness. Just two hearts, broken open in the same quiet place. And maybe, just maybe, that was where love began. 2 days. That was all they had. The town council announced that the federal judge from the regional circuit would arrive within 48 hours. His verdict would be final. No appeals, no delays. If the charges stood, Elsie would be transported to a women's work colony in Kansas or Wyoming. The names alone sent chills down her spine. Places where sunlight barely reached, and names of the inmates were forgotten within weeks. And the child, the baby she had fed, held through the fevered nights, sang to with a voice hoarse from tears, was now listed on the town registry as ward of the state, no verified guardian. The orphanage wagon was scheduled to arrive the same morning the judge did. Jonas sat by the cell door, reading and rereading the official notices. His knuckles whitened around the papers. His heart beat like a war drum. That night, by the flickering lamp in the jail's side office, he sat down and wrote. The letter was short. "To whom it may concern," he began, hand trembling. "I, Jonas Vance, confess to withholding evidence, concealing the truth, and misleading this town to protect my own reputation. I take full responsibility for the false charges brought against Miss Holloway. I ask that she be released and her record cleared. I ask for the right to care for the child on her behalf." Then he paused and added in a new line, in darker ink, the words more jagged than the rest. "I do not deserve to be called a man if I let a child lose her mother a second time." He folded the letter and sealed it with his family's old cattle brand stamp, a mark that still carried weight in Calico Ridge. Inside the cell, Elsie sat on the stone floor. Her back was straight, but her eyes were hollow. The fight in her had not died. It had simply worn thin. Jonas entered quietly, crouched beside her. "They're coming for the baby," he said softly. She didn't look up, didn't speak. "I wrote to the judge," he added. "Everything. The whole truth. I'll take the fall." At that, Elsie finally turned her face to him. Her voice cracked. "You think it's me I'm crying for?" Jonas blinked. "I'm crying," she whispered, "because she doesn't have a voice. And even if I scream mine hoarse, they'll still hear lies." She buried her face in her hands, and for the first time since her arrest, since the beatings, since the trial of stares and silence, she cried. Not out of self-pity, but out of sheer helplessness for a life too young to understand why love was not enough. Jonas sat with her. He didn't try to console her with promises. He knew they meant nothing here. Instead, he placed the sealed letter into her hands. "I've done all I can. If they still won't listen, then I'll make them." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the man not who had failed her, but the one who chose to rise after falling. "I don't care what happens to me anymore," she said. "But if she's taken, it'll be like losing her twice." He nodded, and in the silence between them, something unspoken bound them tighter than any cell wall ever could. They were not waiting for a miracle anymore. They were becoming it. It was barely dawn when the unexpected arrived. A creaking carriage, weather-worn and coated in prairie dust, rolled into the center of Calico Ridge. The townsfolk, already gathering outside the courthouse for the final hearing, turned their heads as the horses halted. 3 figures stepped out. Henry Montrose, Lillian Montrose, and a man in a dark suit with a leather briefcase, their lawyer. The Montroses looked like ghosts of themselves, gaunt, pale, eyes hollow from weeks on the run. But there was clarity in their gaze, a decision carved by guilt and the long road home. Henry stepped onto the courthouse steps and raised his voice. "We are here to confess." Silence fell like snowfall. Everyone, council members, the town minister, citizens who had spit on Elsie days before, turned to face the man they once revered. Henry cleared his throat, voice shaking but steady. "We left this town to escape prosecution from the eastern authorities," he said, "for land fraud. I falsified deeds. I knew it was closing in." He looked directly at Jonas, then Elsie. "And in our desperation, we did the unforgivable. We asked Miss Holloway to protect our daughter, to hide her, because she was the only person we trusted, and then we abandoned her. We let her carry our guilt so we could save ourselves." Lillian, standing beside him, began to cry. She stepped down, crossed the square to where Elsie stood behind guards. Without a word, she embraced her. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I beg for it anyway." Elsie, stunned, didn't return the embrace right away. Then, slowly, she placed her hands on Lillian's back, just once, then stepped back. The square was frozen. No cheering, no shouting, just stunned stillness. From somewhere in the crowd, a woman said quietly, "We tied an angel to a pole." The council reconvened briefly. There was nothing to argue. Charges were dropped. The letter Jonas presented was validated. The Montroses signed formal affidavits. The judge's carriage was halted mid-ride. No trial would be needed. Jonas stood nearby. People looked at him now with complex eyes. Not just the rancher anymore. Not just the silent man. The rumor would live on. About who he was, where he came from. Montrose's bastard, they would whisper in saloons. The brand would not fade quickly. But Jonas no longer bowed to it. Elsie, too, did not stand tall in victory. She remained still, composed. No triumph gleamed in her eyes. Only relief. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, she approached the old town minister, her voice soft, trembling. "I didn't lie," she said. "I just couldn't shout louder than their judgment." The minister removed his hat. "And yet you never stopped standing." Jonas found her minutes later, beneath the old elm near the jailhouse where they had spent their longest night. His eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. "I cried when I buried my dog as a boy," he said. "Then never again." He looked up at her. "Until today." Elsie reached for his hand. Jonas turned toward the townspeople who lingered, watching. He raised his voice, clear, sure. "She was called a liar. I let the truth stay silent. And I won't ever do that again." A long pause. Then he looked back at Elsie. "I want to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind." She didn't smile. But she didn't let go. And in that moment, the truth finally belonged to them, not because it was shouted, but because it was carried through fire. A year had passed. The ranch wasn't grand. The fences were patched with mismatched wood, the barn leaned slightly eastward, and the paint on the porch peeled like old sunburn. But it was alive. Children's laughter spilled from the back fields, mingling with the clatter of buckets and the quiet rhythm of wooden clogs tapping across the porch. Nurse clogs. Where once stood Blackstone Ranch now sat a new kind of homestead. A rural nursery and medical outpost, built from salvaged boards, and paid for with the sale of Jonas's prized horse stock. No one asked him why he sold every breeding mare he'd spent 10 years raising. They just saw what he built in return, and the quiet way he moved through it all. Elsie ran the place. She tended coughs, stitched wounds, bandaged hearts. When the harvest season slowed, she taught letters to children who'd never held a book. She never called herself a teacher, or a nurse, or a hero. She was just there, always. Jonas handled the fields, repaired fences, cooked when Elsie forgot to eat, kept a journal each night by oil lamp, though no one knew what he wrote, likely only one word per page, if that. And hope. The baby left behind by the Montroses toddled now through the kitchen, her curls bouncing, her laugh bright. She called Elsie Ma. She called Jonas Pa. They never married. There was no ceremony, no signature, no legal knot tying them to one another. But the town of Calico Ridge stopped asking questions. Everyone knew what that little house on the ridge meant. A home built by choice, not circumstance. By 3 people who stayed when they had every reason to run. In the clinic room, above the worn bookshelf, Elsie had hung a simple wooden frame. Inside it, the letter, the original, water-stained, creased, once called a forgery. A young boy once pointed at it during his cough syrup visit. "Does it have magic?" Elsie looked at him and smiled. "No," she said. "It just needed someone to believe in it, and someone brave enough to lose everything to prove it was real." He nodded solemnly, as if understanding far more than his age allowed. Jonas's final quiet gesture came in the spring. He planted a white elm tree in the very center of town, right where, a year before, Elsie had been tied, judged, nearly broken. He didn't speak at the planting, just dug the hole himself, watered it, set a small wooden plaque beneath its roots. On it, carved by hand, the words read, "The truth stood here once, and we nearly let it die." People came by. Some left wildflowers, others just touched the bark and walked away. No one dared remove the plaque, because they knew, and now no one forgot. That was enough. In the evenings, as cicadas hummed and the lanterns glowed inside the nursery windows, Jonas would sit beside Elsie on the porch. Hope would fall asleep against her lap, and the world, loud, cruel, rushing, would soften just for a while. Elsie once turned to him and said softly, "Do you ever miss it? The horses, the auctions, the reputation?" Jonas looked out at the setting sun. then at her. "I thought I'd miss being a man people respected," he said. "But I was wrong. I missed being a man worth respecting."